Welcome to Indie Conversations, the video series from CSIF that's all about talking to our local community of filmmakers here in Calgary. Today, we have a great special guest. We have Morgan Ermter of Numera Films here to talk about his latest project that you can go and check out at the Calgary International Film Festival called Crow. So to jump right into it, can you do your elevator pitch on what Crow is about?
Very simply put, Crow is about this girl who's very passionate about crows and has to decide between her love of birdwatching and the ridicule she's facing at school and that pressure, and which is she going to what's she going to sacrifice in order to maintain her love of the crows.
I love that because I think everyone has some sort of phase they go through, and maybe it lasts for longer than just a phase, but I need to know if this is built off of anything in your personal life, or were you really into birds growing up?
The bird watching aspect of it is something that's very personal to me, and that's kind of where a lot of it stemmed from, where at my parents' house, or a lot of my grandparents, always on the shelf by a window, you'd find a Birds of Alberta book.
Sure.
But the story itself works as kind of a metaphor in my mind, and because of that it's a lot more personal. It's very much a queer story, and when it was posted on SIF, I saw that one of the tags for the short film wasn't that it was in that category. And so I was thinking about that for a minute, and I think that that's actually kind of the point of the film. A lot of people that have seen it that haven't sort of clocked that are people that aren't in that community, and I think that's sort of the point, where it's all about sort of friendship and acceptance just for who you are. And so if you don't know any of the underlying themes behind that, then that's just what it reads as. But for a lot of my friends that are queer or trans that have watched it, it's immediately recognizable. It's oh, I see exactly what this short film is about, but it's through the lens of bird watching and wearing a goofy crow mask, so very inviting and easy to get into.
I love that. I mean, that's so similar to a recent feature called I Saw the TV Glow, where it's a lot of just regular audiences went into that and be it's this weird story about getting stuck about watching a TV show, and then so many other of the trans critics were no, this is very obviously a story for us and about us type of thing. So it's interesting that there can be two different reactions to the same material.
My hope is that if you're just a person watching it, and I've heard a couple pieces of feedback. I was talking to some friends of mine that were trans, and they're this is literally about me, and I was that was the point.
Oh, that's great.
That's very much what it is. It's kind of a reimagining of my childhood through a bunch of weird ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
When you get into your writing process, do you already know that something is a short versus a feature, or is it just you just take where the writing takes you?
I'll know in advance, I think, usually, because, and this is something that it's taken me a while to figure out, but I really believe in the idea that a short film is just not so much a story as it is just an idea. So with Crow, it's just the idea that if somebody tells you that they are that they are into something, or that they're feeling something, or that they're identifying some way, just let them do that. That's great. If somebody asks you to support them in a certain way, it's so easy to just say, yes, go ahead. So
talk to me about the casting process. How were you able to find the best people for these roles?
So we usually will just put out a regular sort of casting call for this. Martina is the person who plays Crow. She's also a queer artist. Mm-hmm. And so in talking to them beforehand, we had a lot of questions about trying to figure out how do we put that narrative into the film as a metaphor. So there's a lot of discussions about what pronouns does Crow have? Do we want to include that much in there?
Right.
And I think it was just a good affirmation for me as well, where they said when we were talking about it early on, it was no, it's so obvious what the the subtext of this is. Just have Crow's pronouns in this thing be she, her. Continue the story that way, and people will understand. It'll be fine. They were I'm comfortable doing that. They'll get clocked with she, her pronouns all the time, and I think that's fine also.
Not to call out someone in particular here, but I have noticed that for some of the bigger Hollywood productions, if there is, say, a character they use different pronouns or something like that. There always has to be like a stop in the action that people have to explain what pronouns are.
Sure.
It's like, okay, yeah, we get it. We
Yeah.
can just have it be that thing.
But I think it was also important. And I mean, if you go to SIF, you'll see that like Martina's performance in that film is like so great. It's the only reason it works.
Yeah.
But because they're like part of the queer community, that I was like, yeah, this makes sense, and it helps bring the whole thing to life.
So you are the writer, you're the director, you're the editor of this piece. Did you just not want to do all the roles here on the film, or?
Usually, I mean, and you'll probably hear this a lot in the indie space, but it comes down to like funds, right?
Yeah, right.
Where this film was, and not to say like there was not that stuff in place for this. Like there was funding for this film from AFA and the Calgary like art development, which was great, and that was the reason that we were able to like get into locations that we wanted to, and to have the equipment that we wanted to do these things. But knowing like what my skill set is in post-production, it's like, okay, if I know that I can spend like a week editing this and I can spend this much time doing it, then at least I can like push money to other places. Yeah, it's something that I'm trying to work on, I guess, as a filmmaker, is doing less on projects. It's a give and take, right? Like sometimes you'll just end up with so much stuff and your backlog is so massive and there's no way to like get out from under the amount of stuff that you've got to edit. But
I have to undo this log somehow.
Yeah. But in this case, I think it worked out. Also, just being such like a personal story, it was nice to be able to just make it very specifically the way that I wanted to in editing.
You do have some, I think powerhouse producers behind you here too, Vicky Chow and Griffin Cork. What can you tell me about with their assistants?
They're great. I mean, Griffin's like a longtime collaborator, and he's the one who put together the casting process for this and organized a lot of that. So like we wouldn't have been able to find the cast that we were going to find without him. Vicky Chow, funny enough, we actually met doing an interview at the old SIF office, chatted with her, and we were like, I love your like approach as a filmmaker and the way that you like look at a very specific subject and like drill down on what that is. And she was expressing like some interest in like starting to push more towards like narrative stuff, because I know she does a lot of like great doc and like unscripted work as well. So it's like, this seems like a fun place to just sort of like play in. But both of them together were able to like offer so much as far as like getting things organized, like filling little gaps, equipment, and very boring things, but
but the things that need to happen, right?
Yeah, and stuff that, in the same vein of taking on too many hats and things, stuff that allows me as a filmmaker to like, I don't have to think about the producing side of things, or I don't have to think about the logistics. I can just think about the story and characters, and they let me do that. So
this is the cool thing about filmmaking, is like all these collaborators get to come together and they all get to have like their say or their piece of the puzzle that they get to put into it to make the whole better than it was before.
Yeah, and I mean that's my favorite thing as well, is in my mind, once the script is done, like as a writer anyways, once the script is done, that's like the most say I'll ever have over what the end like result of the project is. And I think that's great, because people will come up with and have ideas in pre-production, but even like on set, just to make things better. And as much as I can, I'm like, yes, do those things, add more, bring in more of yourselves into this. Like, this is your project also. It's not just mine.
I feel like every project, there's something to learn. There's something new that kind of pops up that, makes you a better filmmaker going forward. Is there anything on this project specifically that you feel like you learned?
I think it was how to like, with both my story and also like the sort of full circle thing that I was talking about. I think it was the introduction of more personal elements into storytelling, and to be sort of not afraid of that, and also realizing that does make the story better. I think there was like a fear that we had a lot, and that I had personally a lot, that like doing that, it's almost like selfish in a way, to be like, no, this is a story about me that I'm telling. In doing this film, I realized like, no, you shouldn't be afraid of that, because like, one, even though it is something that I wrote, it's not my story anymore, right? It belongs to all the artists that were involved in it. And because they are able to see if you see one person adding a piece of themselves to the story, then you're more inclined to add your own piece to it, and then it becomes a kind of like mosaic of all those ideas and thoughts, which is Cool.
So don't feel like it has to be something that was recent, but I want to know what the last great film was that you watched.
The last great film I watched was probably Bottoms, which is maybe a wild pick, but like a friend and I watched it, and I think when we got to the end, the like consensus was immediately I need to have like 100 more films that are written just exactly in this style with this sort of like comedy. It's like almost self-aware in places, but not quite, but it's like just so sharp and biting and quick, and I love the pacing so much. It's such a fun watch, and I think that's where we're coming from a lot with like stuff that we're doing at Numera Films is like we just want stuff to be, we want to, if we're going to spend so much time dedicated to telling any of these stories, we want to have like a fun time doing it. So watching that, I was like, this is just fun, and I'd love to make things that are engaging and have like good themes behind them, but are also just fun. So that one was great.
I love that the football players always wear their football uniforms no matter where they're at. I think it's so funny.
Essentially in film you can do literally anything you want. So like why not mess around and have fun with it and make it ridiculous and unhinged.
Have you been able to watch this film though with a crowd yet?
No, the most I've seen it with was the crew, which was like only 5 or 6 people available at that time. So I have not yet. It'll be its world premiere, I'm pretty sure.
Exciting. Yeah, I'm excited to see what it feels like with a theater full of people. But Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come over here and talk with me.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.